It's good to see everybody. I want to introduce Terry O'Banion, who has been a community college leader for over 50 years. In a survey of 11,000 higher education leaders in Change magazine, he was named one of 11 idea champions who set the agenda for all higher education, and he was the only community college leader in that group. Terry has authored 15 books and over 200 monographs, chapters, and articles about community colleges. He's consulted in over 800 community colleges in every state of the nation, in Canada, Australia, Japan, and the United Arab Emirates. 5 national awards have been established in his name, including the Terry O'Banion Student Technology Award created by Microsoft, and the O'Banion Prize for Teaching and Learning created by Educational Testing Services. He has been the Dean of Students at 2 Florida community colleges, Vice Chancellor for Education at the Dallas Community College District, and Professor of Higher Education at the University of Illinois, the University of California, Berkeley, and a Distinguished Visiting Professor at the University of Texas. He was president of the League for Innovation in Community College for 23 years. Under his leadership, the League became an international organization. Over 750 colleges recognized by Change magazine as the most dynamic organization in the community college world. In 1997, a book on learning a college for 21st century helped trigger the learning revolution in higher education, and his 2013 book on academic advising, which many of you have read, and a monograph of access, success, and completion, which I believe we've all read, have been cited as seminal documents on the completion agenda, which is the topic of the presentation today. So welcome, Terry. We're glad to have you here at Portland Community College.
Thank you, Chris. You forgot to tell him I was president of my 8th grade class. Twice. I'm working on it. I'm so delighted to be here at Portland Community College, and very fortunate that my very good friend Betty Duvall, whom we've known each other forever, was able to join us this afternoon. Thanks, Betty. Betty and I have known each other from way back. In fact, we've grown blonde together over the years. We want to talk about student success and the completion agenda, and I want to frame that discussion around 2 key questions today for us. The first question is, what is the completion agenda and why is it important? I know I sneaked 2 questions into one, but we'll do that. What is the completion agenda and why is it important? And the second question is, what really works to help students succeed? That's getting down to the nitty-gritty. That's where we want to get as a faculty, as academic advisors, as administrators who work at Portland Community College. And that'll be the main effort. But first, I want to set the context of what we mean by the completion agenda. So I want to raise this question again. What is the completion agenda and why is it important? This is the mission of the completion agenda in a very succinct statement. The mission of the completion agenda is by the year 2020 to double the numbers of students who complete a certificate, who complete an associate's degree, or who transfer to the university. It's a very targeted agenda. In a sense, it is the student success agenda is what we are all about and what we've always been about. The completion agenda is a specific targeted goal by the year 2020. How many years do we have left? Just 5. Just 5. And what we want to do is to dive into that and, first of all, visit briefly about why that's important. It's important because it has become the overarching mission of the community college, the overarching mission for all community colleges in the country, President Obama articulated the importance of this goal a number of years ago, and a number of other people have as well. The Lumina Foundation has a little different goal. They're looking at 60% increase in the numbers of graduates and completers by the year 2025. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation have talked about doubling the numbers of graduates. The 6 national community college organizations came together several years ago, and they said we should have 50% more by 2020. So it's a goal that's really picked up the language throughout community colleges. Ohio's goal is 50% by 2020, and almost all states now have that as their single most important goal, and individual community colleges articulate the same thing. Anne Arundel in Arnold, Maryland is just an example. You will find of the 1,200 plus public community colleges in the country, my guess is that 900 or so, maybe 1,000, actually articulate this goal of the mission agenda. I don't think in the history of the community college movement there has been a single goal so clearly articulated and supported by so many groups. This is different for us. We've had all sorts of goals and missions and initiatives come along, and they come along about every 10 years. But none have been so supported, so articulated, as has this goal of the completion agenda. And that's why it's really important. It's important because our failures as an educational system have contributed to what is looming as a national disaster. For example, we were first in the world for a while in the ranks of young adults with college degrees. We're now 16. We were first a few short years ago. Now we're 16. The World Economic Forum ranks the U.S.'s educational system 26th in the world. And we used to be first. So the completion agenda is important to get us back in the running with all the other competitors around the world. This mission is important because the American dream is becoming a nightmare. You probably, in some of your families, some of you can probably reflect how that is occurring in your own families. For the first time in our history, the current generation of college goers will not have the success that their parents had. The American dream is in some difficulty. We see that all through our society, economically and sociologically, we see that happening. My grandchildren will not have the same success that I had in my generation of coming into college. My grandchildren will not have the American dream to the extent that I was able to capitalize on that and to use that, and that some of you can relate to that in your own circumstances. And we know very much what's happening in terms of the great divide between resources in this country. The divide between those who are extraordinarily wealthy and those who are in extreme poverty is widening. And we have, or we're supposed to have, a major role in helping to bridge that divide. But it is becoming, at this point, we haven't made much progress in that regard. This completion agenda is important because of the American high schools and the great difficulties and challenges they face. If you Google the question, what is wrong with American public education, you'll get 278 million links. Everybody's an expert on the American high school, but there are problems there. Here are just a couple of the things that are problems. One third will not even graduate from high school. 1/3 of our citizens don't even graduate from high school, and 50% of minorities do not. If you want to find the source, one of the great sources of what kinds of trouble that we're experiencing across the country right now in terms of the murder rate of young black men, a lot of it relates to these kinds of data. 1/3 of students in high schools who graduate were not prepared for college. 1/2 of those who enter high school will enroll in college. And in math and science, 4th graders are near the top in the world, but 12th graders are near the bottom. Something happens in school. Something terrible happens in school. So the completion agenda is very important because of what's happening in our nation's secondary schools, but it's also important because of what is happening in our own institutions. Now that we've become to the public eye, we have to respond to these issues, and 14% of community college students nationally do not complete a single credit in their first term. 14%, not a single credit. I don't know what your data are at the Portland Community College, but nationally we're not doing very well in helping our students feel immediately successful in these institutions. Almost 50% of community college students drop out by the second year. 50%. 60% need remediation, and in some states and in some colleges that's much higher. I was at a community college recently in the West in which 90% of the students required remediation. 90% of the students. 33% even recommended for developmental studies courses, never even enroll in those courses. There's something wrong between our assessment and placement and advising processes and getting students into the courses they need to take. We recommend and they don't even show up for that. So there's something wrong even with our systems when we try to make this work. Oregon is making a very strong commitment to the completion agenda. Oregon has always been one of the leading educational states in the nation, and we have, I'll show you a couple of slides of showing what's Oregon doing and then what Portland Community College is doing. The Oregon Investment Education Board has a vision of investing in students and teachers now and for the long term, and has a program called the 40-40-20 program, of which you are likely quite familiar. The goal there is by 2025, you will have 100% of your students completing high school. That's an ambitious goal when 50% do not. You have a goal of 40% completing a 2-year degree, and you have a goal of 40% completing a 4-year degree and 20% career ready. These are ambitious goals given the data. You say, or at least the Oregon Investment Education Board hopes that by 2020, 40% of the students will have earned an associate's degree. Within the first 3 years, the progress has been slow, because in 2010, only 16% had earned an associate degree, and 3 years later, only 17% had. So you have your work carved out for you. But at least there is the commitment, the strong commitment to make a difference in these programs, and there are systems being set up and organized in your state to achieve the goals of the completion agenda. The OIEB has launched a number of initiatives in which many of you are involved. You're involved in accelerated learning, achievement, collaboration, STEM, early literacy, quality teaching and learning, all sorts of statewide initiatives to help address the wider goals of student success and the more specific goal of the completion agenda. And Portland Community College has made a strong commitment to the goals of the completion agenda. Your president has articulated that rather eloquently. From training our community's workforce to preparing students for 4-year schools to leading the way in educational success and completion, the work we do at Portland Community College today is at the heart of our region's success tomorrow. And you have taken on a number of tasks to help you reach that goal. You have a Charge to Completion Investment Council. How many of you in this audience are members of that council? And you have these two key goals. Your goal is to help Portland Community College improve student success and completion. You just say it right out there in front. And to proactively respond to the emerging regional and national completion agenda. So you want to be a part of this national activity involved in trying to double the numbers of students by 2020 who complete something. And you have developed and created a number of initiatives to do that. This is a list of some of your major initiatives here. You have initiated Panther Path, the new math pathway. As I understand it, you've done a very good job with the new math pathway. This is probably one of the more encouraging new initiatives nationally. I think your folks went to Parkland College in Champaign, Illinois, to visit folks there who have a very good program in this. And there are lots of programs in new math. You have a new advising model that you're working on. You have strong programs in developmental education. The new student orientation, you're trying to upgrade and broaden that program. You have assessment curriculum alignment activities. You have a new faculty institute. You have a program of financial literacy. You have a campus conversations and forums. You have all kinds of initiatives and activities that you have launched in the last few years to address the goals, to address the strategies to help you get to the completion agenda. I want to raise questions with you about what you've been doing and how you've been doing that, and suggest some challenges to you. If we look at the question, what does it take? What really works to help students succeed? Most of us in the completion agenda work, most of the people who have been involved with this from Lumina to Gates to American Association of Community Colleges to the Community College Center for Student Engagement, have been thinking mostly about the way to address this, the answer to this question, what really works, is to create a set of what are called high-impact practices. Actually, they created two sets of practices. They created high-impact practices, which are practices that might have some research to show that they work. And then they created a set of promising practices. These are practices that we feel as faculty we really still want to hold on to, although we don't have any evidence they work. But they're promising practices and they're up for research. But mostly colleges are talking about the high-impact practices. And generally we think about these as the kind of magic bullets or the magic practices. And here's a list of very common ones. These are fairly ubiquitous across the landscape of community colleges. Obviously, your neighbors over in Seattle were the people who led the charge on learning communities. First-year experience is work of John Gardner out of North Carolina. And there's a whole website. There's a whole package of first-year experiences. I personally never quite. For community colleges, I always thought we would do better if we talked about the first week experience rather than the first year, knowing that about 50% of them don't come back the second year. We might do better if we concentrated on the first week, and we had some conversations about that this morning with some of your staff. Project-based learning, student success courses, early college, high schools. These are the kinds of magic practices that have caught the attention of practitioners who want to meet the goals of the completion agenda. And they are everywhere. The Association of American Colleges and Universities, they talk about 10 major high-impact practices, and they market and suggest that colleges look at those. The Community College Survey of Student Engagement, the Community College Center for the Study of Student Engagement, actually has a list of 13 of these high-impact practices that they say if you implement these practices, you can meet the goals of the completion agenda. Not to be outdone, the state of Oregon says there are 27 of these high-impact practices. So we don't go missing when someone says, well, what's the high-impact practice that we're going to implement at our college this week or next week or take on for the year? High-impact practices are of considerable value. They really frame a theory. They frame a set of practices. Many have been field tested. Much of the data show that they actually do have impact. But the researchers are beginning to question the great emphasis on high impact practices. And here are a couple of quotes from some of those researchers. This is the group first that is doing all of the research on the Completion by Design initiative. I think you're familiar. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation created 3 states, Ohio, North Carolina, and Florida, gave them millions of dollars to implement high-impact practices. They got to choose the ones they want, and then they were to scale them up across the states. And I've learned that movie. They have been practicing at this now for about 4 or 5 years. Your own Ann Poppy, who was here in Portland Community College, helped direct that. I was brought in as a consultant for 2 years at the Gates Foundation to help design that project. And the people who are doing the research on the outcomes of that really well-funded effort have this to say about best practices. While colleges will likely need to adopt some new practices and adapt some older practices, practice-based reforms cannot be the primary work undertaken by colleges participating in completion by design. Best practices are not quite enough. Now, another major research group is called the Community College Research Center at Columbia University, led by Tom Bailey. There's an extraordinary researchers there, particularly a guy named Davis Jenkins, who writes widely and who speaks to Community Colleges Group. They also championed the high-impact practices, but more recently, Davis Jenkins said, adopting discrete best practices and trying to bring them to scale will not work to improve student completion on a substantial scale. There are no magic bullets. You can't just get learning communities and think you've solved your problem. You can't have everyone participating in dual enrollment in the high school and think you've solved your problem. There's several problems with these high-impact practices. One of them is that they as you organize them, they sort of create silos. They create islands of innovation. For example, if this is the group of faculty here who are championing learning communities, they're deeply excited about learning communities. You give it your all. You do great learning communities, and yet here's another group of people in the institution who's particularly interested in first year experience. So they set up programs, they get resources in the institution, and they create the first year experience, and yet the first year experience people really don't connect to the learning communities people. The learning communities people don't connect, and so you have these various groups in institutions championing different high-impact practices without anyone seeing the overall picture or creating a total common culture that supports student success. Think about that at Portland Community College. Think about whether or not there may be a campus here that is a champion of a certain impact practice. They want every student in their college to participate in a required student development course. But another campus doesn't want to do that. They want students to all participate in a first year experience activity. You begin to see the kinds of problems that can be created when you concentrate on these sort of very specific programmatic units and try to support and develop high-impact practices. The other problem with high-impact practices is that they're hard to scale up. But their value gets lost if they're not scaled up. The whole idea in completion by design is that we're going to test out a magic practice. When it works, we're going to scale it up and require it of everyone in the institution. I don't think that's happened anywhere. Even Miami-Dade, that's deeply engaged in this process. It's hard to scale up. In the first 5 years of the Achieving the Dream project, which is a big Lumina project supported with millions of dollars, something like 27 colleges in the first round, in the first assessment made by MDRC of whether or not those colleges had been successful, they had been successful in getting people's attention that making decisions on the basis of evidence is important. That was a success. But they failed. They only reached 10% of their audiences in scaling up. These programs become boutique programs. Instead of becoming college-wide and changing the whole culture of an institution, where many, many students benefit from the good practice, they don't get scaled up. It takes a different kind of culture. It takes a different kind of leadership. It takes a different kind of vision to think about how you scale up those sorts of problems. What I propose to you is that join me in thinking a different way about this. Instead of thinking about the high-impact practices or the magic practices, I want you to think about the broader culture of an institution. I want you to think about what could we do as a college that might help the whole institution move forward, in which many people would be involved, not just the Committee on Learning Communities. How could you get the great majority of people in institutions to support a specific guideline or principle of student success to see if we can make a difference? I like to think about, instead of high-impact practices, I like to think about principles or guidelines for student success. And I want to share about 6 of those with you as examples of that way of approaching the issue of trying to meet the goals of the completion agenda. I want to share 6 principles of student success. Just call them that for the sake of communication. Here's the first one. Every student will make a significant connection with another person at the college as soon as possible. But of course, instinctively you know that's right, particularly when you understand the kinds of students who come to us. If a college could do something to meet that goal, you would probably change the culture rather dramatically. We know this is important. The SESI data, they do research every year, and for the last 10 years, when they ask the students in SESI, and there are over 500,000 of them now have answered this question, when they say, what is the most important factor in your staying in college, their answer year after year, semester after semester is, someone knows my name. It doesn't get any more complex than that. I stay at this college because someone knows my name. That's not rocket science in terms of a program, is it? So what does a college do? It isn't just the name. It's making a human connection. That's what the students are asking for. If I can make a human connection at this college, I will stay, more likely than not. So when a security guard meets a student in the parking lot, the very first time she's driven on campus and says, I'm sorry, miss, but you're parked in the wrong place. Let me help you find the right place to park. Some more human connection is made than, hey, you're parked in the wrong place. When a student walks in to the building where all of those processes of advising, assessment, admission starts, and there's a kiosk there, and a student who is on assignment that day says, hello, welcome to our campus, what's your name? Some kind of better connection gets made. When faculty members greet students at the door the first day of class and shake their hand when they come in the room, connections begin to be made. So what if you implemented a no-cost program in which as many faculty as were willing to participate agreed that they would meet students on a name-to-name basis the first day of class at their door? Could that change the culture of the institution? It would be a small step, but it might end up being a giant step for your students. What if in the first class period, a large group of instructors agreed that they would spend time doing some work so that students would know who each other are and might know some of their interests and might even work on a project the very first day. They have all the technology in their hands to do it, to create a photo directory of every student in that class that every student would be able to download and take home and that the teacher would have. There are thousands of ways of creating those connections in a college. Now, why do you want to take the time to make those sort of personal human connections? I'm here to teach my discipline in my course. I don't have time for all that. It'll take time away from my course. If you want students to stay around long enough for the good stuff, your course, if you want them to learn about the great beautiful ideas in literature, if you want them to learn about the gorgeous algorithms of math, they have to stick around. If on the front end you're a more welcoming person or college, if the college climate, and yours is already very, very good, the point for you would be to try to get it so good that it touched every student. And who does this stuff? Everybody in the institution. It's everyone's agenda. Student success and making connections is everyone's agenda. It's something that students can help with. Student clubs can take this on as projects. It's something that classified staff play a very important role in. Classified staff are the first line people. They play a very important role. If faculty see it seriously as a way of keeping students around so that students can benefit from the instruction they have to offer, they will participate in it. Everyone in the institution can participate in this. Do you see how that's different than we're going to depend on learning communities to do the job? It's a different way of thinking about it. Let me show you a couple more of these. The second one is key intake programs, including orientation, assessment, advisement, and placement, will be integrated and mandatory. Two ideas, integrated and mandatory. Integrated because if students come, they need to see this as a series of activities, of processes to complete so that on the first day of class, they'll be ready to go. And it might start back, it starts back the first time they touch base with the institution. It starts back here when they call and say, I'd like an application sent to my home. That's when the process starts, maybe a year ago. And then it goes through, maybe it's concentrated in the summer when you go through assessment, advisement, course placement, etc. But that whole process has to be integrated. If a student comes to an office and gets an admissions form, gets an advising appointment, and then someone says, well, you have to go now to the financial aid office, and it's in that building over there, you're going to lose some students. They won't come back. So it needs to be integrated. It needs to be a seamless experience for students to move through that process. And that's the task of orientation and academic advising, to figure all that out. And then mandatory. We never mandated that people had to do these things because they weren't classes. You have to go to class. In some places, not really. But you have to go to class. But you don't have to go to orientation. Well, what did Kay McClinney used to say? Students don't do optional. They don't do optional. So if you're going to invest in these services, and we know that an investment in these services is profoundly important to the success of students, then why not make them mandatory? You got to deal with that issue. And we had a group of people, a number of people in this room, who dealt with that question and came up with 3 of those programs that should be mandatory. I hope they'll share some of that information with you. But this is the kind of general guideline for student success that touches a lot of people in the institution. And you take on this kind of guideline and say, that's going to be a guideline for us. You may get more mileage out of it than if you said everyone should take the student development course as a high-impact practice. The third guideline is, in addition to assessing student skills and knowledge, affective dimensions will also be assessed. Now, most community colleges use AccuPlacer and Compass to place students in developmental education programs using instruments not designed for that purpose. They're not very effective. Many colleges develop their own. But we haven't done a very good job of assessing those personal dimensions that every student brings to the table that don't show up in knowledge and skill sets. There's a major movement across the country now to start assessing the more affective dimensions. Every report ends with, we need multiple assessments, because, and that's code for the assessments we have aren't good enough. So we need multiple assessments, and Those assessments are now beginning to, researchers are suggesting to us that it's the affective dimension that's missing. There are a number of interesting things going on in the country. Chaffey College, which is in Rancho Cucamonga, California, Chaffey College uses a hope scale, testing the students' indicators of the hope they have in themselves. You would agree that if a student has high hope, that's probably better than having no hope or low hope. These were good scales created by the Gallup Corporation. The Gallup Survey Corporation created the hope scale. There are scales in mindfulness. When people look at that activity that goes on in the mind, which is a very popular activity now, there are scales for mindfulness. There are even scales to try to measure grit. Remember when your grandma said, you got to have grit, boy, if you're going to make that happen. You have some students who have a lot of grit who perform very poorly on knowledge scales. And so it's a matter in your advising processes of trying to figure out, is there enough grit here that we could take a chance on this student of putting them in a college-ready English course when they don't measure up on the scales that say they have the ability to do that or the experience to do it. If they have enough grit, enough hope, maybe we can take that chance and maybe we can capitalize on that to help them move successfully through the institutions. I think you're going to see a lot of affective education come along. Here's the California Task Force on Student Success. They now require every college to consider other measures of a student's ability to succeed, such as academic history and demonstrated motivation. Motivation, mindset, history, grit, hope, those are some things for you to think about. The Educational Testing Service actually has, I think, had a really breakthrough on this. They have a thing called the Success Navigator that actually does, in a 30-minute online test, measure much of this work on affective education. Student Success Guideline number 4, every student will be placed in a program of study from day one. Every student will be placed in a program of study from day one. Students who have not decided on their program of study will be placed in a mandatory program of study designed to help them make the decision about a program of study. There's a lot of good idea in that. We know from the research, again, at the Community College Research Center out of Columbia University, students who entered a program of study in the first year of college were twice as likely to graduate as students who entered a program of study in their second year. If you can get a student connected with their, what you don't have in Oregon, majors, if you can get them connected with a program of study, an area they want to specialize in, and have them sign up for that, they're much more likely to complete than not. That doesn't mean you push people into those programs, because a very large percentage of students are still undetermined about what they want to be. And we have to recognize that and allow for it. I think a good idea is that why don't we create a program of study that's required for students who are undecided? We know that, again, from the research, students have too many choices. And our students, who are many of them already unsure, unclear, with a history of failure in their DNAs. Pat Cross talked years ago about that we have a whole group of students who come with a feeling that they're failures. You have to deal differently with students like that. So knowing that too many choices confuses and creates stress, say, if you're not sure what you want to do, here's the program you take. You can take it one course if you want to, if that's all you can sign up for because you're working, and that course is the Student Success course. If you have more time, it's a learning community of 3 courses. It's the Student Success course, it's a course in writing, and it's a course in psychology. And it's a learning community. And you're going to get 9 credit hours out of this. And you don't, At the end of it, the goal is you need to decide on a program of study. But we don't just let students wander around in the jungle of the curriculum, hacking their way through the underbrush. That leads to failure. That leads for not returning to the institution. Give some thought to that. I think that the idea of a mandatory program of study for students who are undecided has a lot of coin for us. The fifth guideline is every student will be carefully monitored throughout the first term to ensure successful progress, and the college will make interventions immediately to keep students on track. This is terribly important. The kinds of students we have, this is like the first week thing. What if you could monitor a student in the first week? As soon as you saw signs of non-attendance, not turning in papers, not participating in classroom discussions, you could alert a coach that might contact that student and help them get in step with successful students. That's what Rio Salado College does in Arizona. They have every faculty member in their courses gets a course sheet of students, a class sheet of the students, and by the student's name, there's either a red dot or an orange dot or a green dot. The green dot says this student already has performed quite well and is doing quite well, should be moved through your course pretty easily. The orange dot says caution, this student may need special help from you, and the red dot said this student has had difficulty in the past and is likely to have it again in this course. Be alert. It's alerting the faculty through data analytics, identifying students who might need help. If you apply data analytics to predicting students' behavior, and we can do this quite well now, you can increase retention, one researcher says, by 20%. That's worth the effort. You know what data analytics, you know what that is. You experience it all the time when you're a customer. And when you go to Amazon.com and the screen says, "Welcome back, Harvey. We're glad you were here. Again, the last time you were here, you bought 3 copies of 50 Shades of Grey. And there are these books you might be interested in as well." That's data analytics. And in 5 years, we will be using it in very sophisticated ways to monitor our students' progress. And when we find them not progressing, we will intervene. We will then be able to really bring a whole different sophisticated service to students. And notice that's a kind of analytical process that's not a high-impact practice either. We're trying to make a contrast here between student success guidelines and high-impact practices. The last one that I want to share with you is that every student who enrolls to pursue a certificate or degree will work with college personnel to create an individual student success pathway, a roadmap to completion. This idea of having a visible pathway makes so much sense. It's caught the attention of all of the completion agenda people. What you really want to have is a visible, well, roadmap that students can see. If you think about plastering it on the walls all the way around, it starts back there when the student contacts the college, and you follow them all the way through, and technology supports it and keeps it alive and makes it changeable, and you move it all the way around the walls. It can actually become not only the roadmap for each individual student, it has potential for becoming the roadmap for your strategic plan for the college. Because if student success is what your goal is in the college and your primary reason for being, then maybe the student success pathway has potential for becoming a highly visible roadmap for the college where everyone can see it. And then everyone in the institution knows what it is. If it were plastered on the walls of the gymnasium all the way around, you'd be able to see what the college is really about. You'd be able to make interventions. You'd be able to make changes. You'd be able to report data of success. You'd be able to report the The student success pathway is, in the last 10 years, a formidable, substantive idea. The Gates Foundation helped lead us in this. This is the Gates Foundation student success pathway. It moves from connection, entry, progress, and completion, and then it has a lot of activities under it. That was one of the first articulated in the country. At the League for Innovation, my colleagues and I, we kind of liked that, but we wanted to make it more human. And so we sort of designed a different roadmap. It's a little hard to see here on the screen, but we wanted to make it people moving through different kind of sequences and steps. The Association of American Colleges and Universities actually created a roadmap project, and they worked with about 24 colleges that have these roadmaps that all their students go through. And you can see some of the interesting names here. I kind of like Lane Community College's A Guide to Personal Success. It's the GPS. Roadmap to Completion, Miami-Dade, Mount San Antonio, Digital Roadmap. Valencia College's Life Map is really a formidable life map. You go into that college, and it's the one concept that sort of frames so much of what Valencia does. And Valencia, several years ago, won the Aspen Prize for the Outstanding Community College in America. And one of the reasons is because it has so detailed this idea of the life map. All the walls in Valencia are covered with students talking about the importance of the life map. It's a highly visible program. If we were really smart as a culture, we would create, though in our country, I doubt if we could do this, but what we would try to do would be to create a kind of a life map for every human being born. And you would get along with your birth certificate, you would get a life map program and maybe a little tablet to go with it. And you would start tracking some things. You would certainly start tracking in about the third or fourth year when you say to your son or daughter, what do you want to be when you grow up? And your daughter says, I want to be a nurse. And your son says, I want to be a ballerina. And I want to be a fireman. Students start very early talking about careers, don't they? They think about careers early. What if you captured that technologically, maybe with a picture, and kept it, and then that continued as a process all the way through secondary school that got passed on to the community college, that got updated, milestones made, assessments made, important recordings made, the student himself or herself making assessments of the progress as they do at Alverno, great success school. They require Alverno students to constantly evaluate and assess their own progress. And so if we built that in, assessment as student success, because our ultimate goal is to create students who don't need our assessments because they have it internally. They've become independent, self-possessed people who can make their own decisions. That's our ultimate goal for students. So if this became a process that they practice from the third year, or at least in kindergarten all the way through, we would have a group of people who would become pretty good self-assessors, and they would have the evidence right there. They would have the life journey. They would have the life map. And it would follow them all the way through. First marriage, first child, second marriage, all the way through. It would follow them along. First house, first bankruptcy, going back to college, all the way around. I'd love to see that visualized in our society. I think the last entry would be from the hospice worker who would say he breathed his last today. He died an elegant, pleasant death with his family around him. Be the last entry. I don't expect we'll get to that point of building that kind of life map, but I think by explaining this sort of extreme implementation of it, you could see the value of using it for your students at least through the 2, 3, 4, 5 years in which you'll have responsibility for that piece of their journey. For that piece of their journey. These are 6 principles. There are more. You could think of some perhaps more relevant to your culture, to your resources, to your own vision. But I'd like to suggest that in addition to thinking about high-impact practices, they're good and you're not going to abandon them, and you're going to improve them, and you're going to do a lot of them, and you're going to scale them up. But think differently. Think about what are those basic success guidelines that cut across the institution and build a common culture that will lead us to completion. Also think about how can we build guidelines in which more people get involved? Because student success is everyone's agenda. Student success is everyone's agenda. In the final analysis, this is what our work's about. It's about improving and expanding student learning through quality services and quality teaching. And completion is a valuable byproduct of that work. You are deeply engaged in work here to meet the goals of the completion agenda. I wish you all the success in that endeavor. You have excellent resources. You have tremendous people who have already created a very, very positive, collaborative culture at this institution. Just make it better and better and better. And keep in mind that your ultimate goal is to improve and expand learning for your students and bring all of those good resources that you have to bear to make that happen better than it has. Best wishes to you in that endeavor. Thank you very much. I think if there's time, we have time for some questions. If you feel like some, or maybe statements you'd like to make, testimonies from the field, we'll take anything for a moment here. And we won't. I know I stand between you and your 5 o'clock martini, so we'll not make this long. There's a question here. Yes. Why don't you just say it? I think we can hear in here actually. Yes. What is your question? Yes, you. Yeah. Sorry.
Hi, thank you so much for talking today. My name's Roberto Suarez. I work with the Outreach and Orientation Office at Cascade Campus. Many of the initiatives that you mentioned here today, those 6 principles, I think are things that we have reflected a lot in the type of institution we would like to be, and the goals that we would like to achieve. A lot of times, though, things like mandatory tend to come directly in conflict with the almighty FTE. The idea that when you create, mandatory things, for example, that it could be a barrier to the enrollment of students. So what do you tell an institution when they're so driven at some point, and not that PCC necessarily is, but that has been such a driven mechanism that the colleges have used for so much time to keep enrollment climbing, when some of these initiatives might be more about helping students, come at a time that it's appropriate for them to start at a community college, not necessarily the time when they think they're ready, but the time that we help them determine when they're ready to start.
To be honest with you, I think it's immoral to not do things work because they might reduce FTE. I think that's immoral. And I would make that case if I were a member of this faculty. I'm not sure, though, that has to be, the stress points there. I'll give you an example. We know through research that doing away with late registration is a very valuable move. The research has shown us that. Now, but people in some colleges are reluctant because of FTE. We have to have enrollment, and I've heard presidents say, well, that's a great idea, but you want us to pay your salary or not, to faculty. It doesn't have to be that way. It's not that black and white. We've had a lot of colleges do away with the bad part. Late registration was a good idea. in the days when we really believed so strongly in the open door college and we wanted to keep the doors open for students. So what generates interest in keeping a late registration is that it gives the student another chance to enroll. But what it does in that same sense creates very bad situations. All this research is the students who enroll late don't get the courses they need. They drop out at a much higher rate. And it sends a message, when you continue to observe late registration, it sends a message that instruction that first week doesn't make any difference, right? And so faculty often just call the roll and leave. They don't do anything for, so you can wreck 1/16 of a semester with late registration. Now, if you do away with late registration, class begins the first day after the last day of enrollment. And colleges, we know now, there's been enough evidence on this, hundreds of colleges have done away with late registration, and they haven't had to sacrifice FTE because there are ways around it. You create a culture in which you communicate to students and high school counselors and citizens that this is the last day of registration. It's the day before the first day of classes. And you just hold on to that, and people will change that culture very quickly. You can help students who do come in late by saying, okay, you didn't make it, well, you can't start classes this week, you can't start classes next week, but 3 weeks from now, we have an 8-week course that you could start, and you can enroll in that. And so you come in and you build other course structures after this, but you don't wreck your schedule, you don't wreck the first week of class. And I think there are compromises everywhere when it comes to that issue of FTE. We all need to support FTE. That is the basis of our salaries because of the way we're funded. So I wouldn't make that the demon. I would just try to figure out creative ways to make sure that that demon didn't master the battle. That makes sense to you?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Other questions? Yes.
I like the ideas of the learning communities. I really think that's a great idea. The one question I have is, have you had experience with bringing in these students who are in developmental educational classes into those learning communities, and how has that worked?
Yes, many learning communities really became popular in colleges because it did include students in developmental education, because it made them, they felt like they were in real college then, instead of just being in the developmental. You know, you can't go into real college until you finish going through the hoops of developmental education. So I think the research on that, there's quite a bit of research now on learning communities. It's been around for some 20 years, shows that students in developmental education perform at a higher rate and leave the developmental courses earlier than they do without that experience, because the learning community provides so much support, and it provides a lot of personal kinds of dimensions that help students. Learning communities are good, they're sound. Yes.
In the past, your guidelines have also included an emphasis on the use of evidence in decision making. Are you backing off from that one, or what?
No, not at all. I just get excited by new guidelines and new opportunities. As I say, I don't. These aren't the only 6 guidelines. I think a creative faculty would come up with dozens of guidelines, and then if you were going to implement them, you'd have to make some sort of program decisions about how much you could carry. No. Data is using data to make decisions and to make judgments about progress and student success is a foundational principle of all of the completion agenda. It was the primary principle targeted by the Achieving the Dream colleges. And I would never back away from that. It's just at different points, I like to feature different things. I think probably colleges now have, I think that guideline is pretty well absorbed in the culture, actually. I think people, now whether people actually use it or not, I think the value has been absorbed because everyone says we believe in data-driven decisions, you know. We don't get a lot of help in learning how to do that very well. Because one of the reasons is our directors of institutional research are compromised by all of their work with compliance work. They have to comply with the accrediting associations, the state associations, the federal government, the financial aid offices, so they have to spend all their brilliant energy filling out compliance forms rather than teaching us how to use data. That's one of the problems we have. Yes.
Hi, I'm faculty, but I've heard a lot of these discussions, and I understand that we need to make some changes, but I'm always worried by the fact that the faculty, of whom I am one, we're really dedicated. We're really dedicated to our students, but I don't think the same messages get out to the faculty that these changes would require. And I'm just wondering, what's the trick to the communication with faculty and helping faculty who are dedicated to their own disciplines to really buy into this? Yeah. Because I think a lot of times they just feel like, oh no, another thing from administrators, they heard something at a meeting, now they're making us do it. I'm just saying this is a generality.
Oh, no, it's more than a generality, it's the absolute truth. But the trick is leadership. The trick really is leadership. Whether it comes from an administrator, as it often does, or whether it comes from faculty leaders who upon themselves take the responsibility for moving beyond their success in their own classroom and want to somehow have impact on their entire division or their department. That's faculty leadership. It can come from anywhere. It takes a certain kind of climate for that to occur. It takes a good administrator leader to encourage that kind of rising leadership from faculty. I think all faculty are passionate and committed and are generally pretty exceptional teachers, even in bad colleges. I think colleges get bad often because of bad leadership. So leaders have to be a part of making the change come about. And good leaders know how to do that. I'll give you an example of a good leader. A good leader was at a college in Southern California. He wanted to bring about a lot of change. He had a resistant faculty who saw this as, if you do this, this is another initiative. And faculty have become cynical about leaders who, and they should become cynical about leaders who introduce the initiative of the month, the initiative du jour. That's a lot of presidents, a lot of vice presidents go to a conference, they hear an idea, they bring it home and say, we're going to do this. That's not the way you bring a new idea to fruition because you'll immediately get resistance. The way you do it is to help a significant group of people, I'll say, I'm just going to say more than 5. If you could get 5 people to listen to an idea and then start figuring out how to bring that idea to fruition within the institution, you can make all kinds of changes. I run for the green lights. Find the people in the institution who care. Find the people in the institution who have vision. Find the people in the institution who have credibility. And come up with the commission on X and give them lots of resources to do the job. A faculty member comes and says, I have a great idea. My division is reluctant to do this. I really think it's a good idea. Try to get some people, convince a few people of that idea, and then go look for resources. The role of administrators, in great part, is to find resources to support good faculty ideas and to honor good faculty ideas. Not every idea you have is not good and can't be done, you know. But does some of that make sense to you? I think we have gotten into a situation where there's so many new ideas popping up all over the place, and the completion agenda looks to faculty like one of those. It looks like an administrator-led something that's coming in from the outside, and it kind of is coming in from the outside. It was sponsored mostly by foundations in the beginning and legislators, so it looks like an external thing. But if you did an environmental scan of your students' success in terms of what you've been doing, this is the strategy to use to get people to look differently. You say, you know, this is a good college, we're passionate, committed faculty members, but look at the data in terms of our success. We have 50% of our students who take remedial education, and only 3% of those people ever graduate. What? Now let's start talking. How do we change that? So I think it's a matter of leadership and how you engage people to get involved in that. I don't think it's harder than that, even though it's hard to do. Other questions or ideas? What's the best thing you do at Portland Community College to help students succeed? What's the best thing you do? Everything. Give me 3. You have high quality instruction, and that's an absolute requirement. Yes, and my guess is you probably do. People who care do make a difference, don't they? People who care and then can do something about that. Caring and hugging by itself may not be enough. I used to have a woman in the college. She was the hugger, and she would walk in and she'd grab everyone and hug them, and she was just so lovely and so generous, and her spirit flowed through everywhere, and she couldn't navigate her way through a classroom. So, what else? Great frontline staff, terribly important, terribly important. They have to come through somewhere to get to your classes, don't they? Your classes are way back here. You know what happens with students way back here in high school? There's where we should be reaching, and then all the way through, then that whole process of moving them through all those processes, they're calling it now onboarding, those onboarding processes before they ever get to your classroom. 1 or 2 more questions, and then let's go home. Anything more?
Terry, thanks very much for coming today. In your 6th decade doing this, how do you maintain your enthusiasm and energy over and over again for so long? What's your secret?
I don't have a secret. The reason I do this is for 2 reasons. I do it because I am a child of poverty. We used to say in my family, we aspire to poverty because we were born in abject poverty. And it's true. True. In the South, I was born in the South, I had hookworms every year of my life until I went to college. I wore my first pair of shoes to high school when we moved to the 7th grade. When I went to college, every pair of underwear I owned was made out of chicken feed sacks from Mrs. Matusik's chicken farm. We paid 25 cents a piece for them. My mother used to say, there was on the back of one of my pairs of underwear, it said 100 pounds of the very best. Chicken feed. So I won't tell you my full poverty story, but I can make you weep. The best thing I ever did in my life was I broke the poverty cycle for my children. It's the best thing I've ever done. And teachers helped me out of poverty. My family wasn't able. I have nephews and nieces who have never graduated from high school. I'm the first one of 19 to go to college. When you come out of that kind of abject poverty, you're scarred, and I'm scarred. I'm scarred for life. I still can't buy an expensive cut of meat at the marketplace. I have, and I'm very wealthy for a school teacher. So I still have those issues of poverty. Poverty runs deep, and I recognize that in our students. Poverty hurts. Every time you turn over a rock, there's a crack in poverty. Sorry. The second reason that I do this, and I'm still doing it, and I turn 79 this summer in August. The reason I do it is because I want to have impact. I want to have impact in my life. Probably should have been a preacher, but I'm sure glad I wasn't, because I think the end outcome there is not nearly as important as what we do, and ours is based in a real world. So I have strong passions and strong feelings about my commitment to life, and I want to have impact. I studied to be a psychotherapist. I completed all the doctoral work to be a psychotherapist at the University of Florida. I had cocktails one time with my mentor, my therapist, and Carl Rogers, just the three of us. I had cocktails one time, not cocktails, I didn't drink when I was a kid. When I was 22, I had cocktails with my mentor and my therapist, Arthur Combs, who wrote Individual Behavior, the great phenomenological psychologist, the first in this country. You may have heard of him. And he invited me to his house to meet Abraham Maslow. So I was in the program, and I finished all the coursework. I've been through therapy, several years of therapy. You have to when you come out of my background. If you want to walk, you know, I crawled for a long time. If you want to walk, you have to have help with that, as our students need help, So I've studied to be a psychotherapist, and then I realized that the impact I could have is like one person at a time, and that wasn't enough. So I became a dean of students in the college and was still practicing therapy. My first book was on therapy. My first book was called The Shared Journey, an Introduction to Encounter. It was used by 200 colleges at one time for the group encounter group. I was a group encounter group guru. They used to call me Mr. Love. My very last encounter group was with the community college over in Washington, in Auburn, Washington. The name I've forgotten of the college for some reason. The college there. I was with the president and the entire faculty, and I burned up. Just burned out. So I quit doing encounter groups in therapy. I became a dean of students. I see that you could have impact on a college, on a large group of students. That was important to me. Someone came along and said, Terry, why don't you be a professor? I was a dean of students through colleges. In 1967, I became a professor at the University of Illinois because they told me you could have impact on people who would become deans of students, and they would become presidents, and that made real sense to me. And then you could write. You can write, and you can have impact on people through writing, and I liked that. And in 5 years, I had written one article. I went to the University of Illinois, and I became a full professor at a Big Ten university in 5 years because I figured out it's all about the writing. It is about the writing and the research. And so someone said, well, if you go to the League for Innovation, you could have impact as the president on all of these colleges, these 20 board colleges, the best community colleges in the country, and you have 700, 800 colleges in the membership. You can have them. So for me, it was a matter of overcoming poverty, and secondly, trying to figure out for my life where I could have most impact. And that's why today I just continue to write and speak, because I want to have that impact. I don't have a lot of time left to have it. And I've still got all these ideas that wake me up at night. So there's some kind of little creativity in there that pushes me. It comes out through poetry, too. I write a lot of poetry. I'm a great cook, a very creative cook. I've won 50 first-place ribbons in making pies at the Orange County Fair and the International Date Festival. Now, I've just given away, I just lost all my credibility. No person can respect a man who makes pies, but it helps round out the picture. You know, one of the most creative things I do, and it has lots of rewards at the end. I could eat a whole key lime pie by myself. Good luck to you at Portland Community College. Thank you for letting me carry on like this. Thank you very much.